Traditional jazz in the Northwest has a long and venerable history. Of necessity, this film can only be an abridged version of that story. If we've not mentioned any bands, it's an error of omission, not malice aforethought. Manchester's very own Saint Jazz Band was formed in 1949, appearing at the 1951 MFJC concert at the Royal Festival Hall, but they played their last gig in 1984. The Northwest has form when it comes to raising traditional bands and musicians. Mart Rodger was there from the 1950s with the Mart and Rodger Jazz Aces, which became Eric Batty's Jazz Aces when Mart went to do his national service, Eric the bass player having taken over the leadership. It later transformed into Dizzy Burton's Jazz Aces. The band saw Roy Williams moving south in the 1950s to join Terry Lightfoot. Mike Daniels' Delta Jazz Band benefited from Johnny Barnes moving to London, leaving behind the late lamented Zenith Six, who had played and recorded at the Royal Festival Hall. Today, Mart Rodger's Manchester Jazz may be seen playing on the first Monday of every month at their own jazz club held at High Lane Conservative Club.
There's music in your heart, but you must do your part. Let's sing again. I'm happy when somebody sings to me a simple melody. Let's sing again. Without a song to sing, what would that mean to cling to? It wouldn't mean a thing without someone to sing to. So now and then, things may seem a little blue. A song will see you through. Let's sing again.
I must admit I'm enjoying every moment of it. It's great, and it's great to see Mart. You know, it's great to see him play again, and obviously see Louis. You know,
He's very kind, or he's very deaf.
there's nothing wrong with being deaf.
You are. The problem of these days is what you hear on, quote, the media. I suppose I'm old and jaded, but when I used to do shopping supermarket openings, a little quartet or a trio playing outside, tiddlers and up to about the age of 7, they'd love it, and they'd be bopping away.
Exactly.
And then suddenly 8, fingers in ears.
Still love playing, and this.
Oh, there'd be no bandit.
And now that I'm over 80, this is the thing. This music is the thing that makes me quite really happy.
How did you first get into the jazz?
Yeah, music, and then of course, and then I discovered the traditional jazz, and that's absolutely knocked me out.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah, good.
How long have you been coming to the 10 years plus, I think.
I know we don't go enough, but It's a bar, yeah.
Do you go to any other clubs or just this one?
We go to the Legion as well. At Point, British Legion. Which is
We should have gone there, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
We could.
Here, 8 years? No, more probably. 8 years on my own.
And it's all downhill, so you roll downhill, don't you?
So I only live up the road.
And you go to Salisbury Cricket Club as well.
I go to Salisbury Cricket Club as well and sell raffle tickets for them. And, friends with the double bass player's wife. We had lunch last week.
Because jazz clubs don't work without all these people, so raffle tickets.
All volunteers, same as anything.
We're very, very lucky that we're able to play our music, indulge ourselves on the back of work done by such dedicated people.
Criminal but dedicated.
In the late 1950s and early 60s, Manchester seemed to be echoing the trad versus modern split, with a local split between the north and south suburbs, with New Orleans style bands in the north and classic or Dixieland bands in the south of the city. Folk like Jed Hone, the cornet player with a rich background in brass band music, led a New Orleans band. He retired last year but still keeps an interest in the music.
Yeah, I started going to the MSG when George Lewis came over with Collier, I think, and then when he played with Barry.
It was 57, I think.
No, I was later than that.
Okay.
60 something or other, yeah.
I've been 66.
Yeah. First heard George play with Ken Collier and then with Barry. And then I was hooked. So saw all the rest of them, you know, Chic and Handy. And I mean, Handy was a total revelation.
A saxophone.
Yes, exactly. Well, no, I wasn't horrified by the saxophone.
No.
I was just gobsmacked, to use an overworked phrase, by how Handy sounded. And he was such a lovely guy, Handy. I met him in New Orleans and went around a few places with him, and he was good fun. He never would sing his dirty version of El Abar for me, though.
What year was your trip?
I think it was probably, well, I first went to New Orleans, it was probably 67 or 68. I think I was probably the first person from our little group in the sports school to go over there. And there was all sorts of revelations, really. I mean, I was confused about Kid Thomas as well.
I can understand.
I'd never heard a trumpet player who just disappeared for ages and ages and then came back in with rather loud noises, you know.
That spitting approach.
Yeah.
Totally unique.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure whether I liked him or not. But later on I learned to love him and cherish his band. But it was hard to, when you were used to other people, you know. Used to perhaps cuff Billy playing with Barry or Ken Collier. Thomas was something different. Paul Seeley, we were just talking about. You know, I never met Paul Seeley till he decked with the Zulus a couple of years ago, because I must have missed him when he played with Barry. And of course he's southern based, so us people benighted up here in the north never get to see people like that.
He had his 10 years in the Barber Band.
Yeah.
Which, when he joined, when John Callan left, he said, I'll do 10 years maximum. And he did. And left by mutual consent. And he still does the odd deck with them.
You see, again, I never saw John Deffery either. Until he came up with the Zulus. I mean, I missed him when he was with Barry. But I mean, you know, Barry had so many good players, didn't he? You know?
Having access to the internet, I came across this Dixieland Jazz mailing list. And I thought, this is interesting, and all these discussions between various musicians all over the world, talking about traditional jazz. So I thought, one question that's always bugged me was, what's the difference between Dixieland jazz and New Orleans jazz, or even trad for that matter? So I put it in, can somebody tell me what the difference is? Well, it was like starting World War III.
Still going on.
Oh, dear me, somebody makes some comments, and say, what a load of rubbish, you know, and contradict him, and somebody said, oh, it's
Dave Donahoe, the trombone player, led many bands based on the New Orleans style. When he moved to live in Scotland in 2010, Dave Pogson took over the leadership of his last band, and today they play as the Spirit of New Orleans. They continue the residency that Dave started at the Delft Band Club.
Satisfied, dear, if you belong to one of
had a good 15-year run.
Yeah, I did a deck job with them about 4 years ago at in Newcastle-under-Lyne at the old brown jug.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been revived.
I did one there a month ago, so it has started up again.
Well, the landlord spent a few bob on a decent stage in the PA system.
Yeah.
So you're on a level playing field at least.
Yes, the only thing was, I just got a new powered speaker and I was playing it, and there was feedback. There was a chap working the switchboard of stuff a lot, and he kept coming up trying things, and everybody was sure it was me, and I kept turning down and turning the speaker, and eventually played acoustically, and it made no bloody difference. It wasn't me at all. I've been turning up, turning down, turning sideways, and this was the guy who was supposedly the PA expert.
So many names from the past. The Stockport-based Savannah jazz band featured Alan Gresty, who moved south with his job at HM Customs and became the mainstay of Monty Sunshine's band in the 1980s and 90s, and Charlie Bentley, of Shep's banjo voice fame, or perhaps one should say infamy. The Dallas Jazz Band featured many local musos, including Rodger Brown, Alan Dent, Bill Smith, Mo Green, and Mart Rodger, who are still active today, not forgetting the late Tony Fowkes, whose Harlem Hot Stompers, a band that had evolved from the Mick Burns Rhythm Kings, are still playing today under the leadership of Ian McCann, with Dave Thomas on reeds.
The original band was the Mick Burns Rhythm Kings, and they were formed in 1968-69, and Mick Burns went back to London where he was working at the time, and we had to change the name to the Harlem Hot Stompers. Yeah?
Personnel has changed quite considerably over the years. The band repertoire was initially Oliver Morton stuff.
Oliver Morton.
And to an extent, when it was Mick Burns Rhythm Kings, they actually copied the actual recording. We've moved away from that, primarily because I think we were into our third trumpeter now. One died, one went down to Cornwall, and Bill's with us now.
Who also plays with us.
And he's been with us about 8 or 9 years now. But as far as trumpeters, were fortunate in Phil Lucas here, his father Jim also plays trumpet.
His father does.
So we can always, have a go and get him with us. You were recorded Spirit of New Orleans, didn't you, the other day? Dave Pogson sat in with us as well, and actually I was with them last Monday at Dunscar. So I think it tends to be a bit incestuous is the wrong word, but we're all you'll see these bands in this area with the same people, playing.
Well, I normally play with this band, but there's no piano, so I can't, can I? So.
You've been with this band for a long time?
I've been with this band since 1969.
Sorry.
Which is that nearly 50 years, is it, something?
Careless love, oh yeah. It goes to your head like wine. It's broken the heart of many poor boys, but it's never gonna break his heart of mine. Oh yeah.
In the 50s and 60s, the Lancashire Society of Jazz Music was based at the Bodega restaurant on Cross Street, holding jazz sessions on Wednesdays with local bands, and Saturdays with a touring London band, Mick Mulligan, Ken Collier and the like. It was a basement club and was the place to be on a Saturday night. It was always packed. Mo Green used to play with the Dallas Jazz Band there on occasional Wednesdays.
Started off going to the Bodega, and then we used to go into the thatched house, which was a bit more modern. That was on the corner of Cross Street and Market Street, but that was a bit modern for me. Of course, the Clarendon was where the Saints and Fred Fiddler used to play, but that was knocked down to make way for the motorway. It first started, Jenks had ordered all the tables and chairs. And the week before it was due to open, they'd all arrived, but they were all covered in paper and string. And guess who had to go and help them undo them all? We spent 2 days undoing furniture, but we got a free year's membership. Well, I could tell you about the floor in the MSG. They painted it with black paint, and with all the condensation, it was like soup. And we all danced like crazy, and all the girls had to go in the ladies' loo and wash their legs before we could go home on the bus. Honestly. The great one was George Lewis. Would you believe that? I only found all these because I was searching for my ticket, which I know I have, but of course it's totally disappeared.
Was that with Barry's Mart?
Yes, yes, with Barry Martin. Yeah, brilliant, there he is.
The Vieux Carré Club met in the Thatched House pub at the bottom of Market Street, just round the corner from the Bodega. Friday was mainly modern jazz and Saturday was traditional. Dizzy Burton's Jazz Aces were there every Saturday in the late 1950s. Many of the visiting New Orleans musicians came to play in Manchester, especially at the MSG, or Manchester Sports Guild.
Onto the MSG, and we started coming to the MSG. We used to come in on the train to the old Manchester Central Station, and then run through the city to the MSG, and then the last train back was 10:30. It only went as far as Northwich. So at 10:20 we see these two figures full of young as number 3 running to get the last train back to Northwich. But that was my first introduction, and I came to live in Manchester in 1966 because I wanted to see more bands, more jazz, and all the different things. And the MSG, of course, was getting to be in its heyday with all the wonderful American musicians coming over and playing with the British bands. And I suppose, like my wife, I was quite privileged to see and hear at very, very close quarters, almost like myself to you now, of all these famous musicians who were just names on records before that. And it was a pleasure. I was never, ever disappointed by anybody who came. Probably my favourite was Henry Red Allen when he came and played with the Alex Welsh Band, because he was a sick man and he died only about a year later. But to see him and hear him was fabulous. And Dave Wright, sousaphone player, marvellous musician, and he said to me, what you need to do when you first start playing, he said, buy yourself an instrument, he said, the best quality. So you're better off getting a good quality second-hand instrument than buying a cheap new one. Yeah. And he also said, play with the largest mouthpiece that you feel comfortable in. He said, don't go for volume, go for tone. Because tone will always come through. And it's the best piece of advice I ever got from a fellow musician. And a great friend to me was Henry Davis of Henry's Bootblacks in Bristol. Dear old Henry. He said, Dave, I give you a word of advice. He said, when you join this orchestra, he said, many musicians, fine musicians, have used it as a stepping stone to obscurity.
Soon the MSG moved to the Sportsman in Market Street, where it hosted many visiting American jazz musicians. Another long-established venue is Didsbury Cricket Club, which meets on a Thursday evening. Their current policy is a rota of 4 bands: the Tame Valley Stompers, the Yorkshire-based Savannah Jazz Band, the Chicago Teddy Bears Society Band, and the Harlem Hot Stompers, playing on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th Thursday of the month respectively, with an extra band, the Warboss Jazz Band, playing if there is a 5th Thursday in the month.
that yes, it was wonderful there because we finished at midnight. Anybody that was in town playing used to come in.
Yeah.
And one night, one young chap came in with a violin case. Said he'd been playing Brooks #1 at the Halley. Could he have a blow? And it was Nigel Kennedy, of course, bless him. And all I remember about him was his trousers were about 6 inches too long, and he played Sweet Georgie Brown with us and Basin Street Blues, bless him. And then all of a sudden the Arts Council took it over because I think Steve Morris was quite ill, really, bless him. And and they said, oh, we don't like your sort of jazz. It's that was it. So they after all those years,
too popular.
1991.
You don't need a grant.
Yeah.
How long have you been coming to Didsbury?
Quite a few years, really. I like this band. It's very good. A bit loud, but very good. I don't pick and choose which band I come to. I come to them all, mostly.
Way to go, it's music.
Yeah. I think they're very good.
Yeah. You started going to the clubs in Manchester in the 50s.
Oh, a long time ago. Went to the Liga, yes, when I worked in Manchester. It's good there. That's a long, long time ago. Before I got married and had my family.
Happy days.
Yeah.
Yes, so jazz, in Manchester, it's always been absolutely wonderful, really.
Yeah.
It's now on a regular. It is confirmed now to be carrying on. There was doubts about it because the landlady's has resigned or whatever. I don't know what the circumstances.
A difference of opinion with the brewery.
Well, I don't know what it was, but it doesn't really matter. But they got a new landlord. And when the one this week or last week, at 8:15, my wife and I were the first two to arrive. And at 8:30, there were 5 members of the audience and 5 band members.
Bienville Jazz Band of Southport, vintage 1959, was started by pupils from King George V School, plus others. In those days, the Queen's Hotel on the Promenade was the main jazz club, having moved around over the years to the Hesketh Arms, to the Albert Hotel opposite the railway station, to the Shrimper, and finally to the Fleetwood Social Club.
There's that old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia, Georgia, as long of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight to the twilight. Other arms reach out to me.
I hardly played any jazz before 1983, and I lived in the Middle East, and I met a guy called David Mills. David Mills was a one-time drummer with the original Temperance Seven, and he was looking for a bass player, which is what I do. I don't normally play these instruments, and he recruited me as a double bass player. And when I came back to England, that is where I ended up as a double bass player. This is my little bit of light relief.
Yeah, just a little add-on from what I was saying about the bands before, going from the bands I previously played in. A very important point for this band is what we're trying to do with this band, the three of us, is well, we all come from a traditional sort of jazz background, and what we're trying to do is open up a little bit more, kind of put in crossover music is the best way I can put it in there.
Yes, we're talking about Willie Nelson,
yeah,
classic case.
It hasn't been, I haven't noticed any of the numbers tonight, but we quite often will go over into a little bit of so-called country and western, so-called little bit of rhythm and blues, which we try and play in that idiom, but there's still that sort of jazz theme running through it, and that's really what we're all about on this little trio of ours. And so far, it's been welcomed wherever we've gone with it. So, you know.
When he shouted, "Who's that?" This is what he heard. There ain't nobody here but us chicken. There ain't nobody here at all. So calm yourself, stop that fuss. There ain't nobody here but us. We chickens try to sleep, and you butt in. Hobble, 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 hobble with your chick. There ain't nobody here but us chickens. There ain't nobody here at all. You're stomping around, shaking the ground, you're kicking up an awful dust. We chickens try to sleep, and you butt in. You hobble, 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 it's a sin. Tomorrow is a busy day. We got things to do, we got eggs to lay. We got ground to dig, and worms to scratch. It takes a lot of sitting, getting chicks to hatch. Oh, there ain't nobody here but us chickens. There ain't nobody here at all. You just tell, stop that fuss. There ain't nobody here but us. Kindly point that gun the other way. Hobble, 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 hit the
Going further north to Preston, we find the Silver Bell Jazz Band, a subset of the Red Rose Parade Band playing at their residency at the Ale Emporium. Two of their members are Southport based, John Rothwell on drums and Brian Legan, clarinet and alto, under the leadership of Peter Vickers on bass. The history of the Red Rose was published several years ago. A fascinating book.
keep him busy with the Red Rose Band. That's the bigger band, the marching band, walking around band. It's still in a New Orleans style. We've about 15 jobs lined up for the summer. We're out on Saturday. One of our favourite jobs at Hilldale. It's just a little picnic area behind the village hall, and we just play with the folk dancers and that. And there's no marching, no hills to climb. And at our age, it's just ideal for us.
Go on. This is Councillor John Collins, the Mayor of Preston, and you come here to see the Silver Bell every fortnight, John?
Yes, that's right, yeah. I know Pete Vickers personally, and partially through politics as well, I must say, yeah. So that's how I got to know Pete, and I think the Silver Bell are great. At my, I called it a mayoral jazz night rather than a mayoral ball. They played for me at that, and everybody thoroughly enjoyed them.
Yeah, and where was that, John?
That was at the Guild Hall.
I played clarinet with Seth, what's his name, Seth Bullitt. I played clarinet with Kenny Ball, with Alex Welsh. I played mainstream jazz with Al Fairweather at the 100 Club of Scotland for Literature Club now, 100 Oxford Street. I played there for over a year, nearly every Thursday with Al Fairweather. And then I played big band music, jazz. I played bebop with Howard McGee. I played avant-garde music with Ken Shaw. We played all over the country. I played it with Ken Shaw at the Crucible. One of my colleagues rang me up, because I used to play snooker for a local club, and this colleague man rang it now, and I said, no, he's playing at the Crucible. Bloody hell. He's not playing snooker, he's playing the saxophone. Said at the end of the night, thanks for turning out and listening to instrumental jazz, good. And I said, I'm no bloody singing. Yeah, because the average person in this country now, there is no music without singing. It doesn't exist, does it? No, there is no music without singing. My wife listens to Desert Island Discs every Friday, and they're dreadful naff record they pick, And these are not bricklayers or navvies or people sleeping rough in Manchester. They're all people who got to the peak of their professions, wherever. And yet their taste in music is tone deaf, brain dead.
That was our first take on jazz in the Northwest. Of necessity, it had to be very abridged, taking the view that the music is really what matters. We hope to return at a later date and film some of the bands that operate in Chester, Liverpool and the Wirral. We also recommend a great website, Jazz in the Northwest. The webmaster is Fred Burnett, who we saw earlier.
In 1992, I retired, and so I had a bit of time on my hands. I actually took voluntary redundancy, which had some benefits because you got your stamp put on for nothing. And you could also go to the local university and go on courses and things. And I noticed they were doing one on the internet. And again, with my electronics sort of hobby, I'd read all about this thing called the internet, but I couldn't imagine what it was. So I did the course at the university, found out what it was on, what it was all about, went onto the internet there because now I had access, and I sort of started looking for jazz because I was getting back into it. And I do remember at that time there was very little on, but there was more coming from America and the Netherlands and places in Germany and places. But I do remember, I thought, I wonder if there's anything about Chris Barber. And I searched for Chris Barber and I found this came up, and the first thing was a guy called Chris who cut your hair. So, so things have changed quite a bit since then.
Don't tell the tax man.
I began to think, maybe I could do one of these websites. And of course, you know, getting back into jazz, I thought, and listening to Tony Davis on Jazz FM saying that there was live jazz in the area, I said, well, I fancy going to listen again. You know, I remember going up to Lancaster only to find that, told when we got to the pub that, oh no, that finished a month ago, you know, but they're playing somewhere else. And they did tell us, so we did go. And I thought I might do traditional jazz in Lancashire. I felt that New Orleans was jazz, the Ken Collier in particular. I you know, that was the style that I preferred. So anyway, back to the website. In the end, I'd covered Lancashire. I felt, you know, I could sit back, and then I thought, and then I was being asked, can you put this on, and can you put this on? And they were kind of outside Lancashire, so I thought, okay, I'll stretch it to Cumbria and Merseyside and Manchester. And so then I renamed it jazznorthwest.co.uk because I got the site registered then with a proper domain name, as they call it. And God, you have to think, what can I call it? So that's why I called it jazznorthwest.co.uk now. But one thing I do like about it is the fact that I'm keeping this material from a historical point of view, you know. And it was probably only about 7 years ago when sort of musician died, and I kind of, somebody sent me, probably dear old Joe Silverman.
Oh, Joe Silverman.
Joe Silverman used to write reams about the person who'd passed on, and so I put it on, and then I thought, well, perhaps I should set up a tribute page. And I think I was just counting earlier, I think it's about 125 musicians that seem to have passed on in the last less than 10 years.
Yeah.
And you look back and you see these names,